Welcome back to our news bulletin. Pakistan has recorded its highest single-day deaths as 153 people died from the coronavirus in the past 24 hours, raising the tally to 3,382. The Health Ministry said 6,604 new cases have been reported since yesterday, bringing the total count to over 171,000. The ministry said over 63,500 patients of coronavirus have recovered so far, while there are nearly 104,800 active cases in the country. It said the province of Sindh has reported over 65,000 cases, while Punjab has reported over 64,000 cases so far. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has announced to partially open the country's airspace for international flights. Khan said the decision is being taken for the well-being of overseas Pakistanis who are stuck abroad due to the pandemic. The number of COVID-19 cases in Brazil has crossed 1 million after a record 54,771 new infections were reported in the past 24 hours. The death toll in the country is nearing 49,000, with 1,206 fatalities overnight. In the US, 678 more people have died, taking the toll to over 119,000. Globally, the death toll has exceeded 459,000, while the infections have crossed 8.6 million. Further details in this report.
The coronavirus cases are accelerating, especially in the regions of America, South Asia, and Middle East. Mexico's death toll has surpassed 20,000 after 647 new fatalities, while it recorded over 5,000 cases in the last 24 hours. Authorities in Mexico City have delayed a planned reopening of the economy. In the U.S., Oklahoma's Supreme Court has rejected a petition asking everyone to wear a face mask at President Donald Trump's rally in Tulsa this week. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has warned the world is in a dangerous phase of the virus and must follow precautions.
The world is in a new and dangerous phase. Many people are understandably fed up with being at home. Countries are understandably eager to open up their societies and economies. But the virus is still spreading fast. It is still deadly.
Over in Italy, the National Institute of Health says sewage water from 2 cities contained coronavirus traces in December, long before the country's first confirmed cases. In the UK, chief medical officers have agreed to lower the COVID-19 threat level 1 notch.
The COVID-19 alert level across the United Kingdom has moved down from level 4 to level 3, as recommended by the Joint Biosecurity Centre. The chief medical officers for England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have reviewed the evidence and agree with this recommendation.
Elsewhere, South Korea has reported a record 67 overnight cases in about 3 weeks. Officials say 31 of the new cases came from overseas, while the rest were locally infected. Meanwhile, China's capital Beijing has recorded a further drop in new infections as tightened measures to contain the spread remain in place.
India has recorded its biggest single-day surge in coronavirus cases, with over 14,500 infections reported overnight. The new cases have taken India's total number of infections to over 395,000. India has now become the 8th worst hit country, as its death toll rose by 375 to nearly 13,000. Officials say there are over 168,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country. They said the recovery rate from the virus is at 54.12%. The Health Ministry says major cities like Delhi, Mumbai and Chennai are badly affected. In another news, Pakistan says the release of prisoners under the US-Taliban peace deal is a stepping stone to kickstart intra-Afghan talks. In a statement, the Foreign Office said Islamabad remains committed to supporting the Afghan peace process. The statement comes 2 days after Pakistan's Special Envoy for Kabul, Mohammad Sadiq, met Taliban leader Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar in Doha. The Foreign Office said Sadiq hailed the Taliban's commitment to implement the Doha peace deal. It said the special representative underlined that Pakistan will continue to play its role as a facilitator for reconciliation in Afghanistan. The Foreign Office said Pakistan hopes all concerned parties will also work towards peace. Iran has criticized the UK, France and Germany for their opposition to lifting a UN arms embargo set to expire in October. In a tweet, Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said the E3 must stop public face-saving and admit their failure to fulfill the nuclear deal duties. Zarif described the E3 as accessories to the US and Israel. He said the European powers have failed to fulfill their own JCPOA duties due to total impotence in resisting the US bullying. Zarif said Iran has always behaved with full transparency with the UN nuclear watchdog. Earlier, foreign ministers from Germany, France and the UK said Iran's nuclear program and ballistic missile tests remained a serious concern for Europe. The three countries also opposed the planned lifting of the UN arms embargo. The US says Washington and Moscow will meet in Austria early next week to discuss the future of arms control. The US State Department said Special Presidential Envoy Marshal Belenzia will meet with Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov. The department said the US has also invited China to join discussions as it wants all three countries to pursue arms control negotiations. President Donald Trump has repeatedly called for China to join the US and Russia in talks on an arms control agreement to replace the New START Accord. China, estimated to have about 300 nuclear weapons, has been rejecting Trump's proposal. Meanwhile, Russia's foreign ministry said Moscow is ready to discuss problems of activities in outer space with the US. China has lamented the UN human rights chief's remarks on Hong Kong, deeming them improper and interference in Beijing's sovereignty. Earlier, Michelle Bachelet had called for China's new Hong Kong law to comply with human rights obligations.
In a statement, Beijing's mission in Geneva said Bachelet's comments on a national security law violated the principles of the UN Charter. It said the new legislation for Hong Kong falls within the sovereignty of a state. Meanwhile, the EU has passed a resolution to protest the law, saying it will undermine the one country, two systems principle. The resolution called for taking the matter to the International Court of Justice while urging Brussels to use its economic leverage against Beijing. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Washington in future will treat Hong Kong as a Chinese city rather than an autonomous one. Speaking at a virtual conference, Pompeo said Hong Kong's September elections will clarify Beijing's intention regarding territory's freedoms.
There are a set of elections scheduled for September. We should all watch closely. That's not that far off now. We should all watch very closely where those elections are permitted to take place in a free and fair fashion. To the extent those elections are delayed, postponed, canceled, or somehow not treated in a way that is fair and open, I think that will tell us everything we need to know about the Chinese Communist Party's intentions with respect to freedom in Hong Kong.
Pompeo said the U.S. is working through a decision-making process over who will be held accountable for curbs to the city's freedom.
The Arab League has announced a plan to hold an urgent virtual foreign ministers meeting to discuss the escalating conflict in Libya. The meeting at Egypt's request comes as fighting continues between Libya's rival administrations. Arab League Deputy Head Hussam Zaki said coordination is underway with the current session's head to determine the meeting's date. Cairo, which backs forces of renegade commander Khalifa Haftar, is pushing for a peace deal in Libya. Earlier this month, Egypt proposed an initiative calling for a ceasefire and peace talks. Libya has been mired in chaos since the 2011 uprising that toppled and later killed longtime dictator Muammar Gaddafi. Thousands have taken to streets across the U.S. to demand racial justice on Juneteenth holiday that marks the end of slavery in the country. In Washington, D.C., protesters tore down and set ablaze a monument of Confederate General Albert Pike. In Atlanta, protesters marched on the Georgia state capitol, while demonstrators gathered outside the Lincoln Memorial in Washington. Over in North Carolina, too, activists toppled two Confederate statues erected on the ground of the state capitol. Meanwhile, one of three police officers involved in Breonna Taylor's shooting is set to be terminated, while the other two remain on administrative reassignment. Elsewhere in Oklahoma, veteran civil rights activist Reverend Al Sharpton criticized President Donald Trump during a rally in Tulsa. Sharpton said Trump failed to address the racial gap in the U.S.
The president said he was coming on June 19th. Didn't know it was Juneteenth Day. Well, let me say something. He was born and raised in New York, where 2/3 of New York is black and Latino. So if you didn't know about Juneteenth, it was because you were so insensitive and isolated. If you did know, you were lying. Either way, you're not qualified as someone culturally deficient to address this country as a head of state.
Now, Trump is due to hold its first major re-election event in Tulsa in the backdrop of weeks of civil unrest over racism and policing. In a similar development, the Human Rights Council has criticized discriminatory and violent policing after the death of George Floyd in the U.S. last month. In a statement, the council said it has also ordered a report on systemic racism against people of African descent. The 47-member State Forum in Geneva unanimously adopted a resolution brought by African countries. The mandate asks UN Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet to examine government responses to peaceful protests. On Wednesday, George Floyd's brother, Philonise Floyd, urged the forum to investigate U.S. police brutality and racial discrimination. Earlier, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Andrew Bramberg, said his country was not above scrutiny but was implementing police reforms. We're now taking a short break, but stay tuned for more news. Welcome back. In Mali, large crowds have once again poured onto the streets of Bamako, demanding the resignation of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. Mali's newly formed alliance of the main opposition parties and civil society groups organized the demonstration. Protesters demanded political reforms, condemning the president's mishandling of many crises plaguing the country. Demonstrators also sang the national anthem and displayed placards bearing anti-government slogans. Militant violence, a tanking economy, and government's alleged corruption have fed anti-Keïta sentiment. Thousands of soldiers and civilians have died, and hundreds of thousands have fled their homes as violence in the country has increased fivefold since 2016. For Syrian refugees crossing Turkey to enter Greece is a huge task as they face Greek authorities pushing them back. But even once they somehow manage to enter Greece, their problems are far from over. Let's find out more in this report.
28-year-old Syrian Mohammed Al-Farhan arrived in Greece through a boat from Turkey in 2017 and lives in a tiny apartment in Athens with his wife and 2 kids. He got asylum late in 2019, but his recognized refugee status comes with new responsibilities. Al-Farhan must find a new accommodation and a job because his support programs as an asylum seeker have come to an end. He has to leave his apartment at the end of June. Finding a job is hard enough under the country's current economic situation, but under the lockdown, it is impossible.
The thought of having to leave our house, it would be horrible. Very bad for us. We came out of a war that destroyed us emotionally, and leaving the program will destroy us further because we will end up in the street. Imagine being on the streets with your children and your family.
In an effort to speed up the asylum process, the government has processed some 23,000 applications in just March and April alone, despite the lockdown. Refugees who have been granted asylum are leaving islands such as Lesbos for Athens. Migration Ministry General Secretary Manos Legatidis says refugees in Athens need to make way for newly arriving asylum seekers. He argues while being asylum seekers, recognized refugees were aware that their assistance will end and they were given time to prepare.
There needs to be a way for them to deal with their daily lives. The answer is surely not for the state to support them in every aspect of their daily lives. That would be institutionalization, which is what we want to avoid. We want to give them the opportunity to make the next steps in their lives which they have chosen.
Family reunification schemes with EU countries and the transfer of unaccompanied minors have picked up after the ease in lockdown last month. But Logothetis says the EU states need to share the burden even further.
Mirror Robotics has developed its Hugo robot to reinforce Japan's shrinking workforce. But as the coronavirus threat persists, the Japanese startup is offering its machine as a tool in the fight against the outbreak. Details in this report.
For better or worse, robots are going to replace many humans in their jobs, and the coronavirus outbreak is speeding up the process. Mira Robotics Ugo is a pair of height-adjustable robotic arms mounted on wheels, operated remotely through a wireless connection with a laptop and game controller. It is being used for coronavirus-related demand.
We have been receiving many inquiries from overseas, including Singapore and France, about how it can be used for coronavirus.
The latest feature of the so-called Avatar robot is a hand attachment that uses ultraviolet light to kill viruses on door handles.
Originally, we didn't intend on having the sterilizing function, but as people began to practice social distancing and avoiding the 3 C's, the robot gained a lot of attention, and we have received many inquiries because it can go to places and operate on its own instead of humans. So we decided to develop the UVC sterilization band.
Ugo, which costs around $1,000 a month to rent, can be deployed as a security guard, while it can carry out equipment inspections and clean toilets and other areas in office buildings. The 2-year-old startup so far has only one Ugo operating at an office building in Tokyo.
In Myanmar, a local resident has started using food trash as compost to transport it into organic fertilizer. He is not only contributing to environmental protection, but also earning handsome income. More in this report.
Food trash is equally harmful for the environment as is the plastic and other metal waste. Recycling waste is usually considered the reprocessing of plastic and other metals. But in Myanmar, a local has come up with a unique idea of transforming food waste into organic fertilizer. In Yangon, up to 2,500 tons of waste are produced every day, mostly from homes and restaurants. Inda Aung So has learned to transform food waste into organic fertilizer.
When we talk about recycling trash, most people see only plastic and other metals. Most are not aware of organic trash. This organic waste also causes damage to the environment at the same level as the plastic does. The food waste is kind of contributing factor affecting global warming and climate change.
So he is not only contributing to environment protection but also earning a decent income. He believes his business is about to grow as some large hotels and private schools have also begun buying his products.
People think that food waste is just trash. Trash. It is difficult for me to introduce the idea to the public that food waste is a natural resource. But I am seeing a bright future for our jobs because some big hotels and private schools are buying my products and they want to change their trash systems. I'm firmly confident that my job will become successful even though we have had difficulties at the beginning.
Inda Aung So said it is difficult to convince public that food waste is a natural resource. He has produced a huge amount of fertilizer and expects to increase the capacity in a few years.
In Brazil, the lagoons in the seaside capital Rio de Janeiro are filled with couches, toys and tires. Even pandemic could not take the edge of pollution, but up close the waters are murky, thick with sewage, discarded furniture and old toys. Let's find out more in this report.
The dolphins and sharks leaping and swimming in Rio de Janeiro's Guanabara Bay belie a dangerous problem of contamination. Pollution is an old problem of Brazil that has plagued the Bay and Tijuana and Jacarepagua lagoons. The recent worldwide pause and lockdowns of coronavirus pandemic has less impact on pollution reduction. The recent worldwide pause and lockdowns of coronavirus pandemic has less impact on pollution reduction. Today, it remains littered with garbage, bottles, plastic bags, lids, beds, shoes, and tires.
Here, because of the lagoon system in the Jasiripagwa lowlands, a neighborhood that borders the Chiusa lagoon, the problem is garbage and sewage. People have not stopped going to the bathroom because of the pandemic. Now they go more because they are more at home. So the problems remain exactly the same, and unfortunately the garbage is still in the rivers.
Fishermen say there is a resurgence in marine life due to lockdown, but the pandemic appears to have made little dent in the pollution. A fisherman, Jesus Coutinho, works on the bay. He believes the coronavirus pandemic has largely helped worldwide environmental efforts.
This pandemic, on one hand, killed a lot of people, but on the other hand, it made a good contribution to nature.
According to statistics, Tiwaka has 6.5 million cubic meters of mud and garbage, which grows with each new rain.
This is a garbage deposit where part of the population throws everything into the rivers, and the rivers end up like this.
According to the Baya Viva environmental movement, pollution affects some 100 coastal lagoons of Rio de Janeiro state coast.
Seven major European investment firms have threatened to pull money out from Brazil over the surging destruction of the Amazon rainforest. The rising threats from investors show how the private sector is taking global action to protect the world's largest rainforest. The firm said they will divest from beef producers, grains traders, and even government bonds in Brazil if no progress is made on the issue. Deforestation of Brazil's Amazon has surged to an 11-year high in 2019 and has risen a further 34% in the first 5 months of 2020. The right-wing populace has weakened environmental protections and called for more mining and farming in the Amazon region. However, Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro has shrugged off diplomatic pressure on the matter. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.